Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody, back to Wednesday Night Saturn and Capricorn Cycles webinar. This is the second part of a two-part series to start off our Saturn and Capricorn extended series. You know, we're going to explore Saturn and Capricorn around the houses in next week, I think on the 11th, the 13th, and the 18th of December. So if you haven't got your enrollment there, I want to talk about that briefly and give everybody a quick tutorial on the fact that once you enroll on that forecasting webinars page of the website, you must be looking for the confirmation email from us and select that hyperlink in there to register with GoToWebinar service. This is old news for you on this call tonight, but for newer people that are listening to the replay and the recording of this webinar, I just want to be clear that you must register with the webinar service in order to get your unique link to join at this time, and in any event time, of course, in the future, and that will allow you to get on the live call. Even if you choose not to participate live, you still must register to receive the PDF and the recording afterwards. It'll be distributed 24 hours after the live broadcast from GoToWebinar, from the webinar interface. So you must register regardless of your intent to participate live. So I hope that's real clear. And so just kind of wanted to go through that one more time because we have several people that were somewhat confused about the process. And I am distributing that PDF directly from GoToWebinar now because I want to cut down on the amount of emails flying back and forth between MediaMonk and the webinar service and the website, or the event newsletters through Constant Contact, which is the second place that you can achieve an enrollment for any of our forecasting webinars. So I hope all of that was somewhat clear, and with Mercury retrograde. So if any questions arise, call 605-348-5111 or email MediaMonk at evolutionaryastrology.net. So we really do appreciate you joining us tonight. Kim Marie has prepared somewhat exhaustively today for this forecasting webinar. So I hope you enjoy the content. I'm sure you will. And call her right if necessary to visit with me. And I'll turn it over to Kim as we have started the recording.
Thank you, Leroy. Welcome everyone to the second part of this series, as Leroy said. The cycles of Saturn in Capricorn, December 19th, 2017 through December 16th, 2020. And yes, I have a lot of material to get through, so I will try and do so as clearly and efficiently as I can. If you have any questions that arise, you are very welcome to interact with Leroy on the Q&A chat pane. He'll answer as best as he can, or pass the questions over to me if he would like to get my opinion on anything. Before we get started on tonight's material, though, here at EAN, you can study with us 3 different ways. You can listen to our free weekly audio podcasts from our website or iTunes. You can subscribe to our Astro Library, where we put all of the classes, workshops, webinars, etc., all the material we've gathered over the years into the 3 different sections you see on your screen. You can subscribe 1, 6, or 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. You can also enroll in our Evolutionary Astrology course. There are 3 different segments. You see them on your screen as well. And through the month of December, you can use the coupon code Capricorn at checkout to get 25% off the materials, which means that you want to get a binder and the DVD sent to you, or both. You can have a digital only version, doesn't go on sale. You can get both materials and digital. That one also 25% off. And so let's jump right into this material. Here again on your screen are the dates that Saturn goes into Capricorn And then in 2020, it's going to go into Aquarius for 3 months, dip back into Capricorn for a retrograde, and so spend about 2 3/4 years in the sign of Capricorn, basically 2018, 19, and 20. Here are the dates that Saturn is retrograde in Capricorn. As you can see on your screen, there is a retrograde cycle in 2018, 2019, and 2020. Saturn is retrograde once a year for about 4.5 months, 140 days. You can see the degrees on your screen there as well. When it makes the retrograde, of course, in 2020, it had barely dipped into Aquarius here 2 degrees before it retrogrades back to 25 Cap, going direct, and then again, as we saw earlier, heading into Aquarius for almost 3 years, the end of 2020. Whenever Saturn is retrograde, you will always relate it back to the natal Saturn archetype. So as we go through the next 3 retrograde cycles of Saturn in Capricorn, where is your own natal Saturn in your own chart? By sign, by house, what aspects does it make natally? Transiting Saturn is always going to be throwing off those conditioning factors to that natal Saturn archetype. And of course, Saturn retrograde throws the door open to the unconsciousness or the outer planets that you see on the bottom of your screen: Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Saturn, when it's retrograde in Capricorn, can bring about some possible falls from grace to adjust any power extremes. There can be resource upsets to balance the material world. And of course, we can expect some of that to hopefully happen as we've looked at the extremes of wealth inequality through Pluto and Capricorn since 2008. It is a time period to review your own inner security as changes go on in the outer world around you. Cancer polarity, it's an opportunity to love yourself regardless of any circumstances, deepening your own sense of self-responsibility, regardless of what doesn't or does work in the outer world. It's always up to each of us to take charge of our own world and how we want to create it. And Saturn retrograde in Capricorn is reviewing how we want to create that. It's a time period to utilize any letdowns as an opportunity to, again, take charge of your world, to make whatever changes you want to make. It's also an opportunity to empower any of our social support systems via that Cancer polarity that Saturn retrograde points to. This is a brief look at Saturn retrograde. Whenever it does go retrograde and makes various aspects, we talk about it on our free weekly podcast, so you can find more information on those as we go through the next Saturn retrograde cycle in 2018. What I want to do tonight is jump right into Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. Probably most of us are aware of the fact that in 2020, these 3 planets are going to be congregating together and making conjunctions. It's going to start with Saturn making a conjunction to Pluto, January 12th, 2020 at 23 Capricorn. Jupiter is going to make 3 conjunctions to Pluto in 2020 between 23 and 25 degrees Capricorn. And that's going to be followed with Jupiter making a conjunction to Saturn right along the winter solstice, December 21st of 2020 at 0.5 degrees Aquarius. So there's a lot to breaking these 3 down, as well as some other things. And so tonight's going to be more of talking on the collective, because in the second series we're going to do, which is 3 parts, which is looking at Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto transiting through Capricorn through the 12 houses. That's going to be more personal. So thank you for bearing with me tonight as we look at most of these cycles from a collective level. Many of you might remember back in 2014-15 when Saturn was in Scorpio, it made a three waning semi-squares to Pluto. They were in mutual reception in each other's sign. That initiated that balsamic phase, and that's the last of the 8 phases in the 360-degree circle. Balsamic phase is returning back to source, returning back to broad spiritual principles. It's also about resolution and karma and resolving whatever needs to be addressed in any way from the original conjunction. This balsamic phase, as you can see, is 2014 through 2020, and during that time period we've had Saturn in Scorpio all the way through Sag, and of course now this initiation into Capricorn for the next 3 years before the Pluto conjunction. This will continue to have us see old realities and structures crumbling. And because individually, collectively, we can be so security orientated, this tendency for a soul to project past forward, we resist releasing the control. We resist the old realities. And all you have to do is look at the United States politics and the Republican Party that has control of both chambers of Congress. And they're like the dinosaurs turning back any social progress that has been made over the last 8 years of the previous administration. And as I've had a year to reflect upon Donald Trump being elected president, I think that the Republican Party can really see they are dinosaurs. And so they're going to grab as much of the Saturnian, Capricornian control as they can because they realize it's that last grasp. What happens though here, and this is where you see your hope, the degree of resistance has a corresponding degree of cataclysm because resisting forces are always overcome by evolutionary forces. We don't have to have cataclysms except to the degree that we resist. And so you can just watch this going on such a collective level. It also, when it's balsamic phase, is going to represent the whole death and rebirth archetype as well, both figurative and literal. As we go through that balsamic phase in the last 45 degrees of the circle, the closer and closer we get to a conjunction, the more the seed thoughts of the new beginnings are breaking free, busting forth into consciousness. And of course, with Capricorn, what it would mean was to make some effort in that physical world to step into those new ways before we actually have that conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in this case. So keep this in mind. You're continually looking at the larger picture, deeper meanings, especially as everything that's a Capricorn word here, social structures, relationships, infrastructure, career, finances, they're not working. They're changing, they're crumbling. Pay attention to those future-orientated messages and act upon them. This will be a specific way to counteract Capricornian despondency and depression. Who amongst us can feel that collective angst and collective depression as here in the US and probably other places worldwide? We look at conservative interests gamble to control as much of the political power and resources as possible. I cannot remember where this statistic came from. I didn't write down the source of it. But somewhere in the last year, I remember reading that 8 individuals in this world, and then didn't list the 8. 8 people have as much wealth as the other half of the world combined. 8 people have as much wealth as 3.5 billion people. I don't know if you can get more extreme with that than Pluto in Capricorn. Stay tuned. We'll see if Saturn makes it worse, or if Saturn starts to bring about some changes with it as it goes through Capricorn, because in and of itself in Capricorn, as we talked previously last webinar, it is a new cycle for Saturn when it goes into Capricorn. Here again, it's going to be very necessary to organize interests of the many and channel that depression into changing structures from the ground up, the Cancer polarity. And it doesn't matter what the interests are, be it climate change, be it race equality, be it wealth distribution, be it how we create our legislative districts. Pick your subject, pick your pet issue or issues, pick whatever is of importance to you right now. We're going to see those wide variety of interests of the many start to come together and make changes. And the first example of that was last month in the United States, the November elections in the off year, the odd year. And as we had discussed last webinar, excuse my burp. I thought I had my meal early enough. We elected a Muslim mayor in the state of Helena, Montana. We elected, a trans person who directly confronted the legislator in North Carolina who brought forth the bathroom bills, if you remember any of that. So there's a wide variety of issues that we're just going to continue to see the masses come together with during this balsamic phase. And again, start to create these new structures. We do not have to wait till these 3 conjunctions between Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. Here is the Gemini rising chart with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and I'm going to be pointing charts out to you all the time because it's sometimes easier to see it visually. I used the July 4th chart for 2:13 a.m. in Philadelphia. Almost everything that we're going to look at tonight is also going to be true for the Sibley chart, which is 5:10 p.m. The only thing that really changes between the 2 charts for the most part is all the houses and the degree of the moon. These slower moving planets, Mercury might move a degree. These slower moving planets don't move very much. Here's that conjunction from January 12th at about 23 degrees Capricorn, still balsamic to Pluto, but getting closer and closer and closer, and being pretty close in its opposition to the natal Mercury in Cancer. And so we're going to have another intense United States presidential election cycle. And we can also expect there to be extreme choices on candidates, just as there was in this cycle. And even if you didn't think, Hillary Clinton from the 2016 cycle was that much different than Trump, a year later, can you see that she is? And of course, Bernie Sanders was the complete opposite of Donald Trump. We will continue to see that through this next election cycle. We will also have all of the wealth inequality become more and more visible and protested. And because transiting Pluto, Saturn at 23 Cap will still be balsamic, the natal US Pluto, we're going to continue to see the US standing in the world crumble. We are not the world cop anymore. And we have a single person, namely Donald Trump, who, if he keeps going the way he is going to manage to piss off every other country in the world. And pretty soon they're going to start doing their grassroots combining, whether it's climate change or it is trade agreements or, you know, financial banking interests, they're going to start going together without us. I remember Jeffrey Green saying years ago that, you know, the US is going to have Pluto in Capricorn, its fall from grace, and it's going to have to go through its reckoning of becoming an equal player with other countries on planet Earth. We can definitely see that this type of lessening is, you know, being it's coming into reality. And who thought Donald Trump would be the one to create that? Yeah. Saturn's conjunction to Pluto, when it comes in 2020, is going to initiate a brand new 33-year cycle between them. And I want you to remember that whatever swings left and swings right can swing back left all over again, even more. And every structure, one more time, that is crumbling is opportunity to rebuild. How are we going to do it? As we start to move through this next year, look at the numerology. 2017 was a 1 year. 2018 is a 2 year. A 2 year is all about building foundations. So while it might look like destroying national monuments and opening them up for, you know, mineral extraction seems a new beginning, just because it isn't in the news doesn't mean national, international, local environmental organizations aren't all moving to organize together to fight this in the courts, or to, you know, bring the people together to look for new candidates that will run for office to change things on a congressional level, be it, you know, federal or state or whatever way. These building foundations are going to come from the new beginnings with both the left and the right. And there isn't anything that says it's fated to go one way or another. As I've said, it is the degree that all of us, the active many, are willing to be active that will determine what happens. Of course, because this conjunction is taking place in Capricorn and close to the US Pluto, there's going to be those that have the haves, the plutocrats, the oligarchs, the wealthy elites. They're going to continue to try and take us backwards or to protect what they have. And that's going to be met with all of this resistance, as you've known that word. And again, whatever consistent efforts each of us want to make individually that then moves it forward collectively. And while I'm using the US as an example most of the time, you know, these cycles are, you know, these trends and planetary patterns are pretty much universal. If you're an international listener to this, you could probably speak up and give examples of how this is taking place in your country, whichever country it is. There's going to be that whole back and forth between what we would call conservative or liberal, or what we would call excluding versus including. Pendulum swings. Remember when we elected Obama president back in November 4th, 2008? That was the first of the 5 Saturn-Uranus oppositions, and that one was 19 degrees Virgo Pisces. And then later on that month, just a few weeks later, Pluto went into Capricorn, late 2008, which is where it's going to be until 2023-24. And so we made that initiatory change with Obama that we thought would be so moving us forward, and all the way through Pluto and Capricorn, we've basically seen backlash. We've basically seen you know, the conservative right fighting all the way over through that, you know, most of it being Tea Party and the Healthcare Act, and now all kinds of other things. Well, this electing our first Black president, in my eyes, created what I call a Whitewing Blacklash. Led to 8 years later. And here we have that example of the old Capricorn order resisting evolution as much as possible. And yet, who has done more to motivate you to get on your feet and do something about what you would like to see changing on planet Earth, let alone in the United States? So, I'm almost a year later going, thanks, Donald. I still wish you'd drop off the face of the earth. But if you got to be the dinosaur Capricorn example, you are doing a good job motivating me. Hopefully everyone else as well. The big thing is, though, as Saturn goes through Capricorn, what will be destroyed in an effort to maintain the past? If you're not following what's going on in the Department of Energy, it is the one department in the Trump administration in which they are full guns ahead. Many of the administration departments have vacancies and positions left open. Not with the DOI. They are growing by leaps and bounds with trying to open up as much mineral extraction across the world as they possibly can, because they don't even think they can do that after the midterm elections. We'll see. There's just a whole big gamble going on by the conservative side. It's going to be telling to see, or interesting to see, how much we can resist it in the courts, how much backlash it makes in the 2018 midterm elections. I'll give a couple more charts that'll show you some dates and aspects for that. Of course, you know, here's one of the biggest worries of what we could be looking at. And, you know, are we going to have a U.S. leader, you know, foolish enough to create World War III? Time will tell. Pray for peace. And then, of course, here again, how much further do we have to get with the wealth inequality before things start to change, or before things turn around? Before the grassroots massive stands up and says, enough. Changing the laws from the grassroots up. Remember, the United States Declaration of Independence was initiated during Pluto in Capricorn. We had the same thing going on 240, 50 years ago. In regards to the wealth inequality, in regards to taxation without representation, and needing to send our resources over to, I think it was King George in England. It doesn't take until the planets go into Aquarius to have rebellion from the plutocrats. Here are the three conjunctions of Pluto transiting over the natal U.S. Pluto in 2022. This is why probably many of us in astrology think that the U.S. again will continue to go through that worldwide fall from grace until we have these Pluto returns and decide how we are going to merge forward or rebirth ourselves going forward and start over again, create a new image for our country on a soul level. So transiting Saturn in Capricorn is going to be part of this crumbling, trying to maintain old structures. They're going to break apart. You're going to see I've got the Saturn hits to the US chart for you in a slide coming up. You'll see what all, oh, there it is. I didn't realize I had put it in there right after that. Saturn in Capricorn is going to be quite active in the US chart, okay? It's not just, it's, oh, I forgot to put its conjunction to natal Pluto in here. All right, let me make a note to this one and I'll put that one in there for you, okay? I can't imagine why I could forgot that detail, but I'll put it in the PDF so that in the one, it'll be in the one I do afterwards. But as you can see, opposed Venus, opposed Jupiter 3 times, Sun. It makes a waxing square to Saturn 3 times. If you don't remember this about the US, I have to give Scott Wolfram credit for this because he's the first person I ever heard this from, and it just light bulbs went off. In the US chart, no matter which July 4th you use, the US Sun in Cancer, 13 degrees, has a square to Saturn at 15 Libra. And it always was this include or exclude, fairness or inequality. And it's kind of, because it's in that natal US chart, it's just kind of like in our blood. In one way, you know, we're mom and apple pie and, you know, all of us white immigrants came together, but in the next breath, we're like, no more immigrants. You know, we forget about what we did to the Native Americans, and we, you know, forget about what we did to the blacks, and we are ourselves are the ones who are guilty for this, us versus them. As Saturn in Capricorn makes all of these various oppositions, you can expect these issues to not go away. We're going to continue to go through the discussions and the battles and whatever you want to say, the changing laws and the challenges to the Supreme Court. All of that stuff is going to intensify through Saturn in Capricorn. And again, because this transiting Saturn through all of these aspects right here are balsamic to that natal Pluto, we are going to just have these real soul-searching moments as to who the majority of us see ourselves as in this country. Most of us listening probably recognize that we are going to be going multi-ethnic, religious, you know, many pass back to source. You know, we're going to get there slowly but surely, one way or another. Kicking and screaming all the way might be the typical path in which it happens. But these oppositions and squares will create big discussions across vast groups of people in the US as we get closer and closer to putting it all together and rebirthing it. Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto over the natal US Pluto in Capricorn. The Jupiter ingresses, I listed them for you because through this, Jupiter is going through the last 90 degrees here with Saturn. And if you're not aware of this, Jupiter-Saturn is about a 20-year cycle. And Jupiter's growth and expansion, Saturn is decay and death. And they keep us in balance here of these cycles on social collective levels and what we can understand on that more conscious level. Remember the first class, Saturn is that structure of consciousness, and Jupiter then interacts with Saturn, and how does this structure of consciousness evolve and grow and resist and decay? Well, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions happen in one element for approximately 200 years before it shifts to the next element. Now, we had Jupiter in the element of Libra in 1980, Jupiter in Taurus in 2000, and now that was the last Earth element, Taurus, and now this conjunction in 2020 is going to start approximately 200 years of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in the air element. So think back over the last 200 years of Jupiter conjunct Saturn. Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, although I think it works backwards as they make their conjunctions. Think about the Industrial Revolution and all the materialism that we've had. And now we're going to have 200 years of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in air, Aquarius, Libra, Gemini, Aquarius, Libra, Gemini. And so this is really, you know, going to shift us even more into that technological advent where, again, just like we've looked with the Saturn, Neptune cycles, robots are going to replace humans. So Jupiter's in Scorpio, as we all know here, starting all those good old, you know, the sexual issues. Here's its date into Sag. Here's its date into Capricorn. Look at down here, the end of 2020. Saturn's going to go into Aquarius December 16th. Jupiter's going to go in December 19th, and we're going to have their conjunction 2 days later, December 21st, 2020, as we saw earlier at 0.5 degrees Aquarius. So by that tail end of 2020, it's going to be real interesting to one more time, see how that US election goes. Do we actually elect someone who is a rebel, progressing forward, or are they going to have the Saturnian effect on Aquarius and be more of the same with Donald Trump? Stay tuned. I'm hoping for the rebel to come through that will progress us as many leaps forward as Trump's trying to take us backward. Here's these 3 conjunctions again, just for you to note and see how busy 2020 is. Jupiter, the last conjunction, as I said, 20 years ago was about 23 degrees Taurus. There was just one. But what we have now through Saturn and Capricorn is Jupiter's going to make the waning semi-squares. That moves it into balsamic phase. And then it's going to make 3 waning semi-sextiles before the conjunction. So Jupiter to Saturn is going to be in balsamic phase here, 2018, 19, and 20, until that conjunction, the end of 2020. These 2 are going to be reviewing 20 years of the societal structure of growth. What has Jupiter tried to create with Saturn, Taurus, in our physical world? What have we got to the ends or extremes of and is decaying because it's no longer supportable? This can be the Jupiter-Saturn cycle where the masses get climate change, Taurus, Earth, where they actually get that, you know, how are we going to live with these extremes of forest fire? How are we going to live when we have, you know, cities that are so polluted you can't see? Which, by the way, do you know that all of the tar sand waste from the Canadian oil fields, all that tar sand is processed in the US in our refineries? And there's a leftover product that's called petroleum coke or pet coke, if I've got it right. That is all shipped over to India. And Indian cities are looking about like Chinese cities where you have to wear the masks because you can't see more than, you know, 2 blocks in front of you. You can't breathe clean air. Watch for that to come in the news here as we go through, and this climate change becomes a bigger and bigger issue. But I'm thinking, again, the last Jupiter-Saturn cycle here, finishing up, initiated in Taurus, we really get some of this materialism as Jupiter in Sag exposes things, and then it goes through a year in Capricorn with Saturn, and we recognize that what we're doing to planet Earth. Here's the Jupiter conjunction to Saturn, the tail end of 2020. It's going to be over here, 0.5 degrees Aquarius again, sandwiched right in between that natal Pluto in Capricorn and the US South Node in Aquarius. We could see collective social rebellions becoming more and more visible and starting to gain traction and make changes even before the Pluto returns. So as Saturn and Jupiter finish up in Capricorn, they have all of their oppositions and squares they're going to make to the planets. We can start to see as they move into Aquarius, the tail end Pluto in Capricorn, things shaking up, things changing. These Capricorn structures breaking down or going to such extremes that the masses go, enough, Aquarian change. Jupiter's conjunction at 0.5 Aquarius. Can see the emergence of new leaders in both the US and the world. It will increase that need to address nuclear weapons. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, and Uranus rules uranium, which is the uranium and plutonium, the things that make up these nuclear weapons. An increased urgency for climate change. When planets go into Aquarius, it kind of builds up, it increases that sense of time. You know, Capricorn ruling space and time. A planet moving from Capricorn to Aquarius, it feels all of a sudden we, you know, went from walking to running. Our sense of time increases and speeds up. So that's where sometimes we feel urgency when planets go through Aquarius. Got to get her done, got to get her done. And of course, all of the infrastructure rebuilding that are, you know, going to come with all these technological advances that will happen, Aquarius following Capricorn, continuing shifting of jobs from labor to services. As robots take over with the labor, our jobs are going to shift more and more into different kinds of services industries. I'll talk about that a little later. And of course, I think that there will be just this Aquarian breakthrough in regards to the public versus private banking and the revolutions that that's going to bring about. I think those are going to come before Jupiter and Saturn get out of Capricorn, and then they'll just explode once these two planets actually get into Aquarius. Here's the Jupiter conjunction to Pluto. I put the first one in here. Here's the 3 conjunctions again from 23 to 25 Capricorn. Here it is over here with Jupiter and Pluto. And as you can see, there'll be a very tight opposition or two to Mercury at 24-28 Cancer, Mercury retrograde. And here are the 2 conjunctions at 24 degrees, followed by this one at 23. This could be some of that last gasp of the wealthy elites to control resources and money, again, versus the masses waking up and realizing the power and freedom of wanting to redistribute wealth in some way. There's many different ways it could come about. It's possible it can come about through the cryptocurrency. I don't talk about a lot about this. The Populous Banking Revolution is the webinar I did a year or so ago that we put free on our YouTube channel. Evolutionary Astronet is our YouTube channel. You can go there for more on the cryptocurrency. The basic thing to recognize about a cryptocurrency is, such as Bitcoin, and there are others that are going along. The pro to it is that it can really address something like money laundering, okay, and it can be as Bitcoin is right now, it can be non-concentrated in regards to the power and control. But the banking elites are already looking at cryptocurrencies to take over for other forms of banking, because you can only use the currency once. Again, it is digits on the internet. And cryptocurrencies could be controlled by a government or a banking entity such as the central bank, and they can turn the currency on and off at the flip of a switch. So I'm not really of the movement to replace the dollar with a cryptocurrency. I would rather keep the dollar, keep the yen, keep the peso, keep the whatever the currency of a country is, and just really switch it from private central banking to public banking. Again, you can get more information on that. I'll have another slide at the tail end here where you can see more of that. But when Jupiter goes through these 3 conjunctions in Capricorn, and mind you, Saturn will just be moving into Aquarius, so Jupiter's transit through Capricorn that year will still have Saturn in Capricorn as well. There's going to be, when these 3 are all in Capricorn together, we will see a lot going on over who gets to control the supply of money and who gets to control the type of currency. If you live in the US, as I will show you, get involved with the publicbankinginstitute.org. Wherever you have the equivalent in your country outside the US, be looking for it and get involved. The active many can overcome the ruthless few. Jupiter, Pluto is a 12-year cycle of expanding soul growth, and we're going to do that on both individual and collective ways. So from 2018 to 2020, we're going to see the continued decay of I use sexual distortions as an example for Jupiter and Scorpio, because we're all aware of that. More exposure of false truths as Jupiter makes that year-long transit through its own sign Sag and initiates its own 12-year cycle of new beginnings in its own sign Sag. And then, of course, Jupiter gets involved in the destroying of old structures when it moves into Capricorn as well. Again, we know Jupiter is growth and expansion, but something to remember about the archetype of Jupiter. Sometimes it will destroy something, and sometimes it will bring along the space or the void to expand into. So Jupiter and Capricorn can be involved in destroying old structures in reality, just like Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn can do. And what Jupiter will do when it finally gets to Capricorn, Jupiter doesn't do anything halfway. It is, if one potato chip is good, the bag is better. Whatever the issue is, Jupiter is just going to expand it all over the place until it gets our attention, whether it is a distortion or a natural expression. So Jupiter, when it moves into Capricorn and has that 1 year there with Saturn and Pluto, it can be destroying structures, bigger and faster than you can even imagine. And speaking of forest fires, we haven't even gotten Jupiter into Sagittarius yet, and let alone the expansions of Jupiter in Sag in regards to the whole fake news and what's truth and what's a lie. Now, throughout this balsamic phase of Jupiter and Pluto, there will still be new ideas coming through that can allow us to rebirth collective orders, political structures, social groups, wealth redistribution. I thought I'd put Pluto and Aquarius in here just to bring some hope. Pluto is going to be in Capricorn 15 years, 2008 to 2023-24. Pluto is going to be in Aquarius for 19 years, from 2023-24 to 2043-44. Jupiter's cycle through the outer planets are going to get longer and longer and longer until Pluto in Taurus is a 30-year transit. It's a very elliptical orbit of Pluto. And so Pluto in Aquarius is sooner or later going to create all kinds of social structure rebellions. Jupiter, Saturn will finish up Capricorn, come through in Aquarius. They'll start to initiate things and lay down the seed thoughts. And then when Pluto follows through here, you'll just see explosions of it come through. Now, I don't know that it's guaranteed. We can have the Aquarian distortion of the extremes between classes and the elites. Aquarius is known opposite of Leo, royalty, Aquarius, upper classes and elites. We could see some of that still going on in certain countries of the world. I don't know that we'll see it here in the US though. I think there's going to be too much of the masses that figure it out and get part and become involved in these changing shifts, not to mention these younger Pluto generations that are going to recognize it. Pluto and Aquarius creating those first quarter squares for the Pluto and Scorpio generation. You know, they're going to shake up the financial systems and structures if they haven't, if it hasn't happened by then. Now, we're also going to have a nodal axis transit through Cancer, Capricorn. And I didn't put those dates in there, but I did put the dates when transiting Pluto is going to oppose the transiting North Node. It's going to conjunct transiting South Node. Most of these dates are 2019, early 2020. As you can see, here's the dates in Capricorn, Cancer. These are the nodes. These planets are all on these dates. Saturn's going to have 3 oppositions to the North Node, and these are going to come about due to its own retrograde cycle happening in the middle of that year. When Saturn makes that second opposition to the North Node, July 3rd, 2019, that's going to be the day after a solar eclipse at 10 degrees, 11 degrees Cancer. Jupiter is going to finally oppose the North Node conjunct South early 2020. We're going to have a lunar eclipse a couple of days later. And of course, if you remember, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction is January 12th, 2020. So early 2020 is going to be quite active. As these 3 planets, one by one, 2019 and 20, go over the moon's south node, it's going to revisit the old Capricorn issues. It's going to expose things on an emotional level. It's going to expose the gender issues. It's going to expose all of the Capricorn haves and have nots. Any issue we have been talking about last class, this class with Capricorn will be revisited when these planetary transits go over that south node. It has the possibility of creating more Capricorn distortions, or if we can expose that distortion and reach over to the north node in Cancer, it is possible to bring about healing and rebirth to new maturing cycles and actions. In other words, we can be so tired of all of these old Capricorn issues that this exposure on emotional levels, and of course these transits here, these are not only going to happen on a collective level, they're going to be happening to us on a very personal level as well. You can look at some of these degrees in your chart and see where you have Capricorn, Cancer in your chart. Where are these emotional issues going to be exposed for you? Because it's the nodes of the moon, emotions. And where are you going to be challenged and hopefully energized to create new healings for you by wherever Cancer is in your natal chart? Stay tuned. As this gets closer, we'll be able to see a little more of what this is going to mean. Obviously, with the nodal transit coming along all of 2019 into 2020, this is going to be past the midterm elections in the US. And so depending upon how those midterms go, if they follow the typical thing whenever we have a presidential election and we change parties winning the presidency, 2 years later at the midterms, there's always a backlash to that presidential party, whatever it is. So if we see that in 2018 and the Republicans lose either the House or the Senate, one or both, maybe not any, but if they do, this will really stir up a lot of the public moon. In mundane astrology, the moon represents the public, and the transiting nodal axis of the moon is the evolution of the public on emotional levels. Will we create a shift in gun control here because we're so tired of the slaughters that have come along so far? Will that be one of the issues that switch as these planets all conjunct south node and oppose that north node? Stay tuned. Again, any of these Capricorn Cancer issues can be coming to the surface as this timing comes around, including, equality between men and women, equal pay between men and women, or the gender issues working their way through various court cases, legislatures, making changes in those areas, both including and excluding. Here are those two eclipses that I talked about. You'll just have those for reference. The one that comes in early July, where we have a north node solar eclipse here, as you can see, within a couple of degrees of the U.S. natal sun, conjunct the U.S. natal Jupiter. We're going to have Saturn over here conjunct that south node within a couple of days. It's going to go 3 conjunctions to the south node when Saturn transits through Capricorn. And so, what's going to be the issue? Sun's going to be on the north node. It's going to be a north node eclipse season. So it is about addressing things on emotional levels. versus staying stuck in the past? Will things break down? Will we try to crystallize them even more? Again, our birthday 2019 in the US will be a time period to watch. And then here's that one from early 2020, right before we have the Saturn conjunction to Pluto, January 12th. And this one is going to be South Node lunar eclipse. Look at all the planets here early 2020 that are on that are in Capricorn, along with the South Node finishing up. Just the intensity of the Cancer Capricorn polarities. I don't think we're going to see this opposition between conservative and liberal interests diminished in the US very soon. If you just look at these charts right here, taking us all the way through 2019 and 2020, we're going to continue to have that type of a polarity in the US. And the pendulum swinging left, right, left, right. I think it's going to take until after transiting Pluto conjunct the US Pluto before we start to see the healing of that, because again, that Saturn Sun square from Libra to Cancer just has that opposition between including and excluding principles so ingrained in our psyche of a country. It's going to take a lot of these young ones growing up and becoming our, political leaders to really start to shift a lot of that polarity into some type of merging, universal agreeing, or majority agreeing rebirth. Planetary nodes. For those of you who are not aware of this, every planet has nodes. Every planet crosses the ecliptic, ascending and descending. Ascending, going above the ecliptic, is the north node. Descending, going below the ecliptic, is the south node. The ecliptic is the Earth's path around the sun. However, from our geocentric Earth perspective, we think of the ecliptic as the sun's path around the Earth because that's what it looks like visually. The outer planets are so far from planet Earth that their nodes are not exactly opposite, and they range widely in degrees throughout any calendar year. Throughout any calendar year. You really need an actual ephemeris to get the specific date to reveal the exact degrees of the nodes. Now, Solar Fire is the most popular. I think there may be another software or two out there that has started to include the planetary nodes. Solar Fire, to my knowledge, was the first one, and it's the most easiest to use. And I put the directions right here for those of you who have Solar Fire and would like to get planetary nodes for any single chart, be it a human, an event, etc. We won't go through that right now. I will just let that be there on the screen for you, and you can refer to that if you have Solar Fire. However, in case some of you don't know this, the south nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are all in Capricorn for several hundred years. In 2020, here's where the south node of Jupiter transiting through Capricorn ranges 9 to 22 degrees Capricorn. The south node of Saturn transiting 21 to 30 degrees Capricorn. South node of Pluto in Capricorn transiting 20 to 22 degrees. North nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are all in Cancer for several hundred years. In 2020, Jupiter's north node in Cancer actually will dip all the way back to 30 degrees Gemini and up to 13 Cancer. North node of Saturn is in Cancer from 17 to 27 degrees. The north node of Pluto in Cancer from 19 to 21 degrees. Again, I just gave you these dates for 2020 because that's building up to their 3 conjunctions with each other. Be a lot of ephemerides we could list as when, you know, Jupiter's transit through Capricorn is exact to its south node. You can play with that yourselves. I'll try and address those when those actually happen in our weekly podcasts. The south nodes of these 3 planets in Capricorn from the perspective of EA means there has been human soul participation in the shift from natural law or matriarchal principles to the patriarchal distortions we see today. These patriarchal distortions started coming about during the sub-age of Capricorn, during the age of Cancer. That sub-age of Capricorn was approximately 7,500 to 6,500 BC. And so we have been looking at these patriarchal distortions coming about during this time period and increasing and increasing and increasing until the last 2,000 years of the Piscean age. Do you even realize how much you have been conditioned by patriarchal distortions? So when we have these planets transiting the sign of Capricorn, again, they're going to go over these south nodes that are in Capricorn with Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. And here's the review. Here's more distortions. Here's the distortions being exposed with all this intensity of planetary energy and the moon's nodal axis and these south nodes in Capricorn. Can we bring this stuff into consciousness to such a degree that perhaps we could address it, shift it, change it? North node in Cancer is always the potential to honor and nurture both genders equally, to honor all of these LGBTQ issues. Almost all species on planet Earth experiment with homosexuality as just part of the evolutionary process. That process of learning to love soul first, gender second. It's also that potential to honor and nurture planet Earth and all species. In other words, those matriarchal principles, giving, sharing, and including. One species isn't better than the other. We're all trying to make it here on planet Earth. So we have the potential to activate and evolve these lessons when planets transit Cancer, and to some degree when they transit Capricorn as well and go through their retrograde cycles pointing to Cancer. 2017 to 2020, transiting Pluto in Capricorn is going to conjunct its own south node and oppose its own north node. 2018 is going to be the strongest year. And all of these Capricorn distortions, as we just said, I just said, are going to be made more and more conscious, because in 2019, the Saturn retrograde cycle is going to activate Pluto's planetary nodes. In 2020, Jupiter's retrograde cycle is going to activate Pluto's planetary nodes, not to mention Pluto's retrograde cycle in 2018. I didn't get those degrees in there. I'm going to make a note to myself here and just put that in. Retrograde degrees. I'll put that in the PDF afterwards. So can you see just how active these planetary nodes are going to be? Everything we talked about in the first class. the evolution of the structure of consciousness, all of the conditioning factors, you know, the cycles of involution with depression, despondency to get us to inwardly look at what's going on, to change our motivations, the inner security versus outer security, the, you know, falls from grace, the stirring up all of the, you know, career issues, accumulation of resources, who's going to be in charge and who's not. These planetary nodes are also going to be in the whole midst of it. And the biggest issue is going to be how gal darn tired of we of these patriarchal distortions. Have we had enough? Will there be enough mass consciousness, Saturn, to say no more, I want to shift this? Stay tuned. Time is going to tell. Here's one more little tidbit for you in regards to planetary nodes. Here's that U.S. Gemini rising chart again for July 4th. The natal U.S. chart has the south node of Jupiter, 7 Cap, opposing its own Jupiter. So the north node of Jupiter is at 9 Cancer. Again, they're never exactly equal, opposite. South node of Capricorn, excuse me, south node of Saturn, 23 Capricorn, opposing the U.S. Mercury. North node of Capricorn, 21 Cancer, conjunct that. And of course, the south node of Pluto is at 17.5 Capricorn. The north node of Pluto is at 17 Capricorn. I didn't know that. I had never looked up the U.S. planetary nodes. And as I was prepping for class, I was like, I wonder where they are. And it was like, oh my gosh, look at this. Everything that I just said in the last slide intensified even more, because the transits of Jupiter joining Saturn in Capricorn and then Pluto, it's just going to intensify all of this. And the way, one more time, to move through any Saturnian depression, despondency, insecurity is through action. Cancer. Cancer is processing. Cancer in health and wellness astrology rules the process of digestion. And along with Jupiter, co-rules the simulation. And both Cancer, Capricorn can sometimes get stuck. They're passive polarities with a cardinal modality in water and earth. So that passive cardinal that goes back and forth, sometimes when it's in water and earth elements, they want their containers and they want their security. Well, this Cancer archetype is always about processing something in order to understand it, in order to move through it. And of course, all this energy in Capricorn is going to say, go back to the past and review. Some of us have to go back to the past and relive it again. How are we going to do that on individual levels? How are we going to do that on a collective level in the United States? And where are we going to find that courage to really go about healing and finding inner security? It's going to come through family. It's going to come through our communities. But it's also going to come by being able to be at peace with ourself, and to be at peace with ourself as a group as we move through these collective falls from grace, and we have to rebirth ourselves as an equal player instead of world cop. It's going to play out so many different ways. I have a couple of slides coming up here with just a few pointers. It's not an exclusive list. It's just a couple of highlights that popped into my head. But I wanted to also include Saturn's waning phase to Neptune. While Saturn is in Capricorn in 2019, it will make 3 waning sextiles to Neptune. This is in last quarter phase. And then it'll make 1 waning semi-square to Neptune in 2021. And from there to 2026, it will be in balsamic phase to Neptune. So Saturn in Capricorn to Neptune in Pisces, it's going to bring about, breaking down any conditioned Saturn beliefs, Neptune. And what we'll have many people doing is wanting to cling to old religious patterns. And, this will take place not just in the US, but all over the world. And there can be a deepening of this depression and despondency with these 2 planets in these signs. What difference does it make? Neptune escapism, Neptunian denial or neglect, the Capricorn despondency. And as it's moving through the last quarter of the circle, last quarter phase to balsamic phase, what is needed is to really deepen our understandings of spiritual principles through the Capricorn chaos and upsets and crumblings of structures and old realities. The beauty, even though we're about 8 years away, there's only 1 conjunction of Saturn to Neptune in 2026, and it will happen at 1 degree Aries. So talk about breaking down old belief structures. We're going through that between now and 2026. Every time something doesn't make sense, can we turn inward and go, what would you have me know, source? Neptune, Pisces, followed by what would you have me do, source? Saturn, Capricorn. Can we be reaching for deeper, broader spiritual understandings? Can we be having those conversations and sharing that with people as best as we can to help others have hope through the changes that are taking place? Can we listen for, search for, ask for the evolution of our beliefs? Natural spiritual principles versus religious dogma that is going to break down with Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn. There, isn't much choice around it. So here's another way of saying it. Environmental depression. As reality does not support our ideals or dreams. The opioid drug addictions could be one example. For many of us, it's the destruction of the social progress we've made in the last 50 years, the last 8 years, the safety nets, destruction of the environment. All of that stuff can, from time to time, with these 2 planets, bring, a wave of what difference does it make? And it's going to behoove each of us to really do that Cancer polarity inner work, to then, act upon how we want to see things changed day to day in our old world and as broadly as we can with collective groups. Now, there will be countries around the world that will observe what's happening, and they're going to, leap ahead with building new structures that are supportive of their people, supportive of their masses. Two areas where we could really see this happen is the concept called UBI, Universal Basic Income. I'll give you a slide on that here shortly. But also changing our infrastructure based upon how we evolve through climate change, not denial of climate change, not ignoring it as we have done with the hurricanes in Houston and Puerto Rico, but really looking at how we move forward and rebuild things in this changing climate. So it's not all, doom and gloom, Saturn to Neptune, but it really does require us to go within and be observant and really have, deep spiritual foundations that, support us, help us feel safe through all of these Capricornian changes we've been talking about. Climate change. Probably most of us on this call recognize that, the increase in these natural earth events will eventually change beliefs, Neptune, about humanity's effect upon the climate. And some of these deepest ethical ponderings will come from recognizing how related everyone and everything is on planet Earth as we finish up Neptune in Pisces. And I thought I just might mention Uranus and Taurus here is going to change coastal living worldwide. Here's where we've got to that Saturn Neptune change some of those infrastructures. And then eventually Neptune, when it goes into Aries, is just going to jumpstart our belief systems, not just around religion and spirituality, but around climate change, around social support systems, around, poverty and hunger, and, technological advances by necessity are going to explode around green energy. And if the U.S. doesn't change its course, we're going to be left behind in the dust. We've always been a leader in technological advancements, and we're falling behind. It's part of that transiting Pluto to natal Pluto, and also part of these old Plutonian political structures. This is a slide from a public lecture I did recently on Uranus waxing semi-square Neptune. If you want, you can again go to our website, evolutionaryastrology.net. I think it's, no, not our website, our YouTube channel, sorry. Our YouTube channel, which is Evolutionary Astro Net.
Yep.
And just, yeah. Heard you, Leroy. Yeah, okay. You were going to just...
Yeah, it's posted there live as a public video, so take advantage of that. It's a great forecasting webinar we did for your one of your groups.
For the EA Zoom meetings, Zoom, which is a free, I think it's a Facebook group. You could go search EA Zoom meetings, and I think if you're on Facebook, you'd find it. They asked me to do a public talk, but it's on our, again, YouTube channel, Evolutionary Astronet. Really goes into Uranus and Neptune, and they're making 5 waxing semi-squares. If you're not aware of those aspects, I would recommend you go watch that video. But here's the other thing. Resources. All 3 of these planets in Capricorn are sooner or later going to expose the truth of monetary systems. How much more extreme are we going to get between haves and have-nots? And as Jupiter goes through Scorpio, this will be exposed. As it goes through Sag, it will be exposed. When Jupiter goes into Capricorn, makes the conjunctions to Pluto, Saturn to Pluto, there is going to be a revolution. And I don't know if, it's going to come through Capricorn and Aquarius with these planetary transits of again, cities, states, countries being so financially strapped that they recognize they can create these public banks. I would highly recommend this book by Ellen Brown, The Public Bank Solution. Here's a little tidbit for you from this book. Here's the countries that have private central banks. In other words, these banks loan money to the government that must be paid back with interest by the taxpayers. United States, European Union, Australia, Canada, and the Bank of England. Here are countries, these are called BRICS because Brazil, Russia, India, China, the S is South America. Here's the percentage. Now these statistics are a couple of years old, okay? They may have shifted, but here's the percentage of public banking in Brazil, Russia, India, China. Canada had public banking from 1939 to 1974 until conservatives convinced them to go private. Australia had it from 1911 to the 1990s. Same thing. This is my personal soapbox for those of you who don't know that. What can you do through Saturn and Capricorn, as well as the Jupiter and Pluto? Join publicbankinginstitute.org if you live in the United States. Join it worldwide if you want to. You don't have to live here. Become active in your community in creating a city public bank, a county public bank, a statewide public bank, where you put all your assets back into your own community, your own, governmental bank. You put your revenue in there. The interest comes back to you. The most popular example of this is the state of North Dakota, which has had the Bank of North Dakota for 99 years. 750,000 people are sitting on $1.5 billion worth of cash. And it's not the oil. It's that their money stayed on Wall Street. Stayed on Main Street. It never went to Wall Street. San Francisco, Santa Fe, and Philadelphia. We might maybe end up putting Seattle in here. These are all cities that are in the running to create a public city bank. Take their money away from CP Chase Morgan, Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, taken, their bonds and pension funds and everything, and taking charge of them and returning the interest to the people so that they can repair their infrastructure, so that they can take care of the elderly and the young and those in poverty. Put your cash and assets in credit unions and community banks. They are all, if you live in the U.S., they're insured up to $250,000 per account. If you have more, you can put it in multiple accounts, multiple community banks. Educate yourself. Ellen Brown started out with her first book called Web of Debt. This is her website. I highly recommend you read her blogs, sign up to her email list, as well as publicbankinginstitute.org. She has a book coming out in the next couple of months, The Coming Revolution in Banking. And of course, here's that one webinar I mentioned earlier where I go through the history of money and I talk about pros and cons of cryptocurrency, private banking, central banking, show you examples of this. As we look at Saturn going into Capricorn, it behooves each and one of you to mature in the relationship with your resources. and to mature in your understanding of how money is created and how you can be a part of the masses taking back the power of being in charge of their own resources. All we're going to need is a handful of these big cities to create these banks, and we're going to see a wave of that happening, just like we saw the wave of legalizing, first of all, medical marijuana and then recreational marijuana. They did it for monetary reasons. We're going to change these, move to these public banks for monetary reasons as well. And I think that the financial elites, I think the wealthy know this. I think this is why they're trying to backhandedly get as much money as they can, because they recognize that as the masses understand this and move forward in this direction, they lose their money cow, or whatever that phrase is.
Cash.
They lose their cash cow, their cash flow. Yes, that's it. Another thing that's coming. Here's that universal basic income. And I went into more detail with this with the Uranus-Neptune semi-square webinar. We're not going to bring the jobs back in the US because robot technology is replacing human labor. Excuse me. Faster, 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 faster. Remember I said that in the US, our jobs are going to go from labor to service. You know, cars that drive themselves, you know, semis that drive themselves, robotic baristas at Starbucks, you name it. And it's going to be harder and harder for more and more people to have fewer and fewer jobs. And so this concept of universal basic income has been growing for a while. And there are actual trials taking place in Finland and Brazil. There are planned trial stages in Oakland, Netherlands City, Utrecht, and 3 cities in Ontario, Canada. Remember, with public banking, the interest comes back to the government. That's how we can fund UBIs for the public. Right now, today, approximately 40% of any infrastructure project goes to interest. Here in my little community of Rapid City, our civic center is 40, 50 years old, and they need a new one. And they're trying to figure out how much money to spend. And of course, then they have to look at bonds. And the whole project, half of the money is going to go to interest of the elite on Wall Street. So here's a specific Alan Brown article. You can also find it on Web of Debt of how you can pay for that. This is the other thing that you're going to see starting to make it into the public eye more and more and more. And that is supplying the masses with a basic income to survive as everything becomes robotic. Fascinating subject that you can go out there and read. There is many out there saying it can't be done as they are saying it can be done. It all depends upon which side of the central banking fence you're on, public versus private. Here's another one that is probably going to come about as we look at Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn. Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution is about how we go about amendments to change the Constitution. And there's basically 2 ways to do it. Either you get 2/3 of both houses of Congress in the U.S., the Senate and representatives, to create an amendment. It has to have 2/3 support, and then it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. This is the only way we've done it so far. So far, any amendments that have come, creating them, destroying them, we've done it 27 times since we created the, what do they call it, Articles of Confederation, before we created that Constitution. The second choice is to have a convention of states. And this would come about if 2/3 of the states requested a convention. So far, we've never done it that way. If we had a convention of the states, any amendments that would come from this convention would still have to be approved by 3/4 of the states. Either way, whichever choice, Congress or convention of the states, 3/4 have to ratify any new amendment creating or destroying. This is a movement that has been gaining ground over the last decade since Pluto in Capricorn. And as we get closer and closer to the US Pluto return, you're going to hear more and more. This is going to increase with Saturn moving into Capricorn as well. Now, the Constitutional Convention gaining the most ground is a balanced budget amendment. So far, 27 states, mostly Republican states, have passed resolutions that they want a convention of the states to vote on a balanced budget amendment. And basically, this would prevent the federal government from going into debt. They could not spend more than they take in. Now, there's a lot to this issue, and the federal government doesn't operate like a household does. If you spend more money than you make, you can't go out and print dollar bills. You will end up in jail. However, if you're a federal government and you're sovereign and you need to print more money, you can go print more money. The US has that in the Constitution, but they gave that power away to the Federal Reserve, which is a private entity, in 1913. Most economists have recognized that when recessions or depressions hit, that is when a government needs to spend more than it makes to jumpstart the economy again. The most famous example of this is Roosevelt's New Deal. When the dirty 30s hit, when Wall Street broke the stock market with over gambling on the stock market, they put unemployed men to work. They built bridges. They dammed lakes. It was called the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC. They operated in all 50 states. The workers were given so much money and they had to send it back to their families so the families could buy food. Of course, conservative interests have been fighting this ever since. One of the conservative reasons for having a balanced budget is it would be a way to cut Medicaid and Medicare. Now, there are pros to that, is that a convention of the states could be convened for a single issue, like a balanced budget amendment, or it could be convened on multiple issues. Equal pay for men and women. Think of the conservative and liberal issues that are of interest to you. You could draw a convention of the states and go through a bunch of issues and come up with multiple amendments. Again, to hold a convention of the states, there needs to be 34 states that pass a resolution saying, I want one, and then we organize it. Whatever amendments are agreed upon, 3/4 of the states must then ratify it. And I think, what's 50 divided by 3/4, Laura, you can do the math and tell me. So this is going to be an emerging issue through Saturn in Capricorn. Because, you know, Saturn is the laws and the rules that we make for a group to function together. we look at this convention of the states as a last resort when the ordinary functions of politics are obstructed. Do you see any of that going on in Washington, D.C.? And the pent-up pressures of the public are great enough. So again, I think all three of these planets could see this coming about. And there isn't any guarantee on whether it will swing to include the masses or exclude the masses. The Koch brothers are the ones behind the groups that are trying to bring about the balanced budget amendment. Because again, it's a backhanded way to destroy social programs. But the same organizing could be done on a liberal or inclusive level and bring about changes that we can't get Congress to do.
I don't know that.
So you
that might be a strong
go
word
ahead.
that they're trying to destroy everything, but they are trying to, the balanced budget amendment folks, what they want to show is they want to starve the beast is a way to destroy it, I guess. But they just want to take
Yes.
the power away from the United States government and hand it over to privatized industry.
Yes, there's a way to say it. That's correct. Privatizing all of the public infrastructures. Speaking of that, let me move over to this one. I have another one.
There's the biggest
Pardon?
thing they're trying to privatize is education right now.
Exactly. And that will be a lot of what will happen through these planetary transits in Capricorn, is to be able to privatize everything for the profit of a few. And you can think of multiple issues in which this is going to be done. And here's one of them. I had mentioned this on the Mercury retrograde, and I had someone ask me a question on it, and I went back and did some research on it. And this is an infrastructure example that's related to the whole net neutrality thing. The FCC in the US, the Federal Communications Commission, do I have that right, Leroy? They want to do away with net neutrality, which the Obama administration had protected. And that means we can charge more money to have different rates of broadband internet. Well, I did not know that back in 2009, the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee, remember the Obama grants from 2009 and 2010, these stimulus grants for the Great Recession? Chattanooga received a $100 million grant to create a fiber optic public utility. It's called the EPB. They created this. They started it, and I think they were up and running in 2009, and they just kept adding to it. Chattanooga has internet connection that is 50 times faster than the average internet connection in US cities. They have 1 gigabyte per second to their internet connection, and they did this citywide. To give you an example of how fast that is, it takes 3 seconds to download the average 2-hour movie. Volkswagen moved a plant there. There have been numerous software startups that relocated there because of their gig economy. An organization called NerdWallet rated Chattanooga the 6th best city for economic growth from 2009 to 2012. Now, mind you, this was when we were in the midst of the Great Recession that came 2007, 2008, when Pluto went into Capricorn. During that time period, 2009 to 2012 in Chattanooga, the median household income increased 13%. Home values increased 14%. This was in the midst of everybody losing their homes to foreclosures across the country and home values just crashing. Do you remember all of that? That's not what was happening in Chattanooga. At that same time, the Republicans controlled the state government in Tennessee. They started implementing austerity measures that resulted in 3,000 jobs lost statewide. The opposite happened in Chattanooga. The Volkswagen plant added 2,000 jobs alone in the city of Chattanooga. The big cable companies, AT&T, Comcast, Verizon, they went to bat, really started lobbying Tennessee to pass laws to make it harder for cities to create their own broadband networks. In 2015, the FCC overturned those laws that were passed in North Carolina and Tennessee. Stay tuned as the Republican-controlled FCC does away with net neutrality. Let's see what happens in this regard. However, since then, 82 cities have followed behind Chattanooga and created broadband internet as a public utility. You still pay for it, but the city controls it, and the city charges you what it needs to maintain it, not to create mega profits. Go do some research on Chattanooga, Tennessee. You'll be amazed at this.
Kim,
So this could be in go ahead.
I'm just observing that this is a very similar analogy to your public banking credo,
Yep.
which is returning the power of the interest that money is generated back to the people. This is returning the power of the broadband, of the pipeline of the internet back to the people.
Yep, that's exactly it. City didn't pass any laws that, Comcast was the major player there, and Chattanooga was, a depressed rural type economy and didn't have a lot of economic development there. And so whoever the city fathers and mothers were, they had heard this somewhere and they started doing it. So this is just another, example of how things could change with time as especially Pluto moves into Aquarius. Because, you look at third world countries and your cell phone is your wallet. It is your bank. And there are places where your cell phones are operated or governed as public utilities. So there's a whole shift of that kind of stuff that's going to come again, as not only.
By the way, many of those third world countries you're referring to, like South Korea, India, China, have this type of high-speed internet. We're behind the times. We just think that we're ahead of the curve in this area. We're not. We're being controlled by the monopolies.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, not only Saturn, but as Jupiter and Pluto move through these Capricorn transits and structures crumble, there's a lot of opportunity on how things can be rebirthed and evolved. But again, it's going to demand the masses. It's going to, demand that active many to show up to overcome the ruthless few. Excuse my burps. I have several more slides left. What I want to do, though, in verse, I don't have so much conversation on them. There's more subjects we could give examples of, but I think with the net neutrality and the U.S. Constitution and banking, you can extrapolate this into every other issue, be it healthcare or jobs or whatever. So I didn't do much on the inner planets except put a list together, and I included the Saturn retrogrades and directs, as well as the 3 planetary conjunctions. So with the rest of my slides, what I am just wanting to do is kind of move through them so that they will be in the video for anybody to watch, and they'll be in the PDF for you to be able to look at. So I have 2 slides on these inner planets, and I just did conjunctions unless Mercury, Venus, or Mars did a retrograde. And if it did, then I would include all 3 aspects that would have an aspect to Saturn as it was moving through Capricorn in regards to that. I guess I do have one more slide that I'll say something on, and that is the fact that not only are we going to have Saturn conjunct Pluto in 2020 and Jupiter conjunct Saturn, Saturn is going to also have a conjunction to Neptune, Chiron, and Uranus. And so you remember Saturn opposed Uranus, Virgo, Pisces. Obama was elected president. We had 5 of those oppositions. So Saturn is in waning cycle, second half, to not just Pluto, but also Neptune, Chiron, and Uranus. So there's going to be a lot of things in regards to Saturnian structures crumbling much longer than Saturn's transit through Capricorn. And so all kinds of, outer world stuff are going to break down. And are we going to support it? What are we going to do collectively? It's going to require a couple of decades of activism as we see things change on planet Earth, with ending of the Piscean age, beginning of the Aquarian age, transiting Pluto, Capricorn to Aquarius, Neptune, Pisces to your Aries, and starting a brand new 165-year spiritual evolution cycle. So now I just want to go through, I do have a forecast coming Wednesday, January 3rd. And I'm also going to have the second part of Saturn in Capricorn. Here's where we're going to go through its transit through the 12 houses. I'll return it back to the more personal as we go through that series. And so now I just have some slides that I just want to get in here that I didn't know if I would have time to talk about. And I guess I'd like to just check in with Leroy. Comments or questions? This is the chart of Saturn conjunct Pluto.
Just comments on all of the transit information that you showed there, especially with the inner planets. I mean, that's really valuable for people to go back to when they do get the PDF, because they can print that out, put it up at their workstation, and plot their own charts and find out, when their Saturn hits are. That's a good research.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you're most welcome. I only did one of the 3 Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions. And here's the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction chart by itself. Again, I did all these charts for Washington, D.C., because for most of us, we're probably going to be so interested in it politically. And then here is something that I had with the Saturn cycles from 3 years ago when we looked at Saturn in Sag, and I realized I probably should have put this in the first class because I'm not going to have time for this, but I'm just going to, again, this material is all coming from Alexander Rupert T's book, Cycles of Becoming. The rest of these slides, but I also then brought Dane Rudier's book to your attention. 2 more books on Saturn if you're interested. But here's all of Alexander Rupert T's comments on the Saturn cycles through those 3 cycles that you saw on your screen. So again, I'm just going to move through them like this. You will have them for your own reference to look at however you want. And I'll just check in with Leroy one more time as I'm moving through this. Comments or questions on anything that I have mentioned?
No, this is great information. Thanks for the extra work today. We were snowed in here in the Black Hills of South Dakota. You can tell Kim's got a lot on her plate. No,
yeah, and this was not exhaustive. This was just me trying to get through some highlights, I think.
Oh, but it's great information. That's a great part of the Saturn cycles, part of our series on Saturn and Capricorn here is to understand this concept that many of us have lived through up to this point. Here we go. But what I wanted to tell everybody is, yes, this PDF will be available. It'll show up in your follow-up email from the GoToWebinar interface. So make sure you get the PDF. You might have to copy and paste the link in that follow-up email into a new browser window to get the actual download. But all of these hyperlinks and references to other content, other websites will be active as hyperlinks as you look at them on your computer. And so it'll help you to get to anything that was of particular interest to you as Kim moved through a lot of information in a couple hours.
Going to be pretty active, not only with Saturn, but Jupiter as well, moving through Capricorn. And yeah, the nodal axis transit, the planetary nodes. Whew. Always keep searching for your own inner security whenever you feel any despondency. And always search for ways in which you can be active in helping move all of us forward on planet Earth. All right, this is the last of the slides. And so thank you all for hanging in there. Managed to get through it in 2 hours. Hopefully this is some good resource information for you. I'll continue to talk about these tidbits on our weekly podcasts that we do. And if there isn't anything else, then I will see all of you. Well, I will see those of you who are enrolled in Saturn and Capricorn through the 12 houses. Thank you, everyone.